Joining us on this special episode today all about vocabulary is Justin Murray. Justin is the CEO and co-founder of RealLife English, along with Ethan. For you guys to have an idea, Justin has over 20 years of teaching experience, and he has taught in classrooms in Mexico, Guatemala, Colombia, Brazil, and the United States. He has also helped thousands of real-lifers in our community speak confident, natural English. And of course, he leads the entire RealLife English team towards our vision of a world beyond borders.
Yeah, global citizens. This is Ethan from RealLife English, where every single week it is our mission to take you beyond the classroom to speak English confidently and naturally, to connect to the world, and of course, to use your English as the doorway to achieving your biggest dreams. So I will start this out just saying that I've lost my voice a bit this weekend. So if you notice some strange sounds, it's not the microphone. It's not any sound problems on your device. It's just me, but I'm going to do my best and I'm going to let the other two coaches here do most of the speaking if I can. But Justin, welcome back to the RealLife English podcast.
All I gotta say is, yeah, it's been great. It's great to be back. Great to participate in this process with you guys. And it's been a long time coming.
You're looking very festive.
It's true. It's COLLOCATIONS coming here in Brazil. As you guys know, everybody in the world, we play football here in Brazil. I'm not Brazilian, right? But I live in Brazil, so I sort of am Brazilian. And we're here playing football and dancing samba, right? This is what we do all year.
Justin looks more Brazilian than I do, man.
It's funny when a foreigner sometimes adopts the culture more than some locals do, right?
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah, there's always this thing that I'm a bit afraid of, like wearing like Hawaiian shirts. And speaking, this is kind of a Hawaiian thing, right? It's like they call it, what is this called?
A lei.
A lei. Like when you go to Hawaii, they kind of say this thing like, hey, you're going to get laid.
What does that mean, Justin, to get laid?
This is a PG-13 podcast, but to get laid is like, I don't know, when you get lucky, when you have sex or something. Anyway, but it has a double meaning here.
It's a double entendre because it's called the lei. So you get laid, they put a lei on you when you arrive in Hawaii, you arrive at the hotel. Yeah.
But one thing I'll say is that I went to a 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗶𝗳𝗍, right? I don't think there's a translation for that word in like a block, but it's kind of like this party. Mm-hmm. And T, our producer here, he's actually playing flute and all these different blocos, all these different blocks in 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗶𝗳𝗍. So he's quite active. And I'm actually in his studio right now.
All right, guys, let's move into the meat and potatoes. The main course, the main attraction for today's podcast. We're going to be talking all about how to successfully learn vocabulary in English. So first of all, I thought we could start with what many of our viewers or listeners might be doing wrong. So 𝗥𝗲𝗹, what are mistakes that you have often seen from your students or other English learners that causes them to fail to acquire or to remember the vocabulary that they really need?
I can share one here, and then I want to see what you guys think about it. But one mistake I see quite often is people, they focus only on words individually or in an isolated way. If you take these expressions that we just went over with the game, all of these are communicating ideas in combination. It's a group of 2 or 3 words that together form a meaning. I guess that's one of the main problems that I see with most learners. They look at words individually.
That is a really big one, right? Is there anything you'd add to that, Justin? Any mistakes you're often seeing?
Well, I think in a recent episode, you guys talked about, lack of purpose, lack of curiosity. I think comes down to that sometimes. I think this is really important to have a strong why and also just to be curious, right? And always be actively learning. So I think, for example, if you're watching a TV series, I think it goes a long way just to have a clipboard. I have a clipboard here, notes, pen and paper. Just be curious. When you hear a word that's interesting, just be like, I'm going to write that down. I want to use that word. Push pause. Try it out. Practice. Right? So I think that activating your learning with that curiosity goes a long way. And that's the base for everything else.
Yeah, curiosity is huge. That's actually one of the things we talk about a lot as being a mindset of successful learners. It's kind of at the core of our Real Life Way method for learning English. And I comment as well, like I use my phone for taking notes. You can be more old school and more into analog, which is great. When I first started learning languages, I had like a tiny notebook I always kept in my back pocket. But nowadays, I prefer having everything centralized on my phone. There's no perfect solution, right? Whatever works for you. All right, so we're going to move into 4 pillars that we have identified that real life English learners, people who are successfully applying the real life way, whether with our courses, with our app, or on their own, that we have seen that they have in common. So the first pillar that we have identified is context. So what do we mean by context here, 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗶𝗳𝗍?
It's about analyzing the situation in which a word or expression or phrase is being used. I can give you guys an example about that. It happened many years ago when I was still more active with my learning. I was watching this TV show, and let me describe the scene for you guys. People were at the table having a meal together. One person says, "Who wants more potatoes?" The other person lifts up the plate and says, "Hit me." When I saw that, as a learner, my first instinct was to look at the words individually, look at the language itself. And then I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Is this woman asking the other to punch her or something? Hit me? But they are at the table. They're having a meal. And then I took a step back and I looked at the context, at the situation. Okay, these people are having a meal and the other one is pointing at the food and showing the plate and saying, "Hit me." So, I imagine that native speakers say that sometimes to say, yes, I want more food, pour me some drink or offer me some more food, so hit me. Yeah, so context is looking at the situation a word or expression is used in.
Yeah, one interesting thing that I noticed, and I think swear words is a good way to explain this. I've met a lot of English learners who are so competently using swear words, bad words, like they master the actual literal use of them, but they have no like emotional connection to the words. And so beyond, I'm kind of going beyond what you're saying there, Thiago, but even in the kind of cultural context, right? So it's like, when should you use a word? So if you drop an F-bomb, right, should you use that in front of kids? If you use that in the wrong situation, you offend people. If you use it in the right situation, it's the perfect word. And it's really hard because you're at a disadvantage because you didn't grow up having your mom correct you and, put soap in your mouth when you swear. And so you're not emotionally programmed in English or in that second language. It takes more time and you need more practice. You almost need to practice in a sandbox, to have that context, that cultural context, really trained into you.
That's true. There's even people who learn the correct way to use swear words, but they overuse them because they don't, like you said, they don't have that sensitivity. So that's a really interesting layer on top of what we're talking about here with context. I think too, just looping back to what you were saying earlier, Justin, about if you're, for example, learning with a series and you just took note of, let's take what Thiago was sharing. If you just took note of the word hit, if you didn't know the word hit, or you just took note of hit me even, and then you looked that up, you might forget what exactly was that being used as. And so you might just say, oh, it's a synonym of punch. So I already know the word punch, so I learned hit. But you're learning the wrong variant there. So that's why it's also important when you're taking notes, when you're capturing that. At least for me, I prefer to capture the word if I'm reading or I'm watching something and then learn it later because I want to just kind of be in the flow, enjoying what I'm watching or reading. But if you did that without the context, then you're going to not necessarily be taking full advantage to learn the right thing, to learn the right kind of expressions and collocations. So in that case, it would have been really good to take the entire sentence there. So if you're reading a book or you're watching a series or anything else, try to capture the entire phrase that is being used there. And maybe another step there could also be things like emotions. And this might happen if you're speaking to someone and they use a word or they use an expression that maybe you're familiar with every word, or it seems like you should understand it, but you don't. And you realize they're really angry or they're really happy. So you can just kind of say to yourself, something here isn't right, and try to figure out through the context there of the situation you're in, the place that you're in, what's happening right now, or that person's mood or how they're delivering that phrase. You can try to figure out what it means, or it can help you to better understand the definition if you look it up. All right, why don't we move on to the second pillar, which is collocation. Now, I think this can be pretty revolutionary. I did want to take advantage because even in preparing for this, something I was unsure about, even as a native speaker, is what's the difference between collocations, idioms, and expressions. And expressions actually have to do with all of them, like all blocks of different words that often go together. Collocations, so let me read the actual definition of like what a collocation is and an idiom is and give some examples. And I got this from ChatGPT, which is a great resource for all sorts of things that come to language learning. So collocations are phrases where words tend to go together naturally and frequently, forming a partnership. For example, catch someone's eye. We saw that one earlier. Strong coffee, crystal clear, scintillating conversation. So these are words that they have a pretty literal meaning, but we'll often see them together and it adds some emphasis or it can evolve the meaning a little bit. Idioms are expressions that convey a figurative meaning different from the literal interpretation of the words. So some examples are bite the bullet, turn a blind eye, and piece of cake. So piece of cake is one also we heard earlier. Something that's a piece of cake is very easy, but it has nothing, that definition has nothing to do with a literal piece of cake, right? So that's why it's an idiom. So I think that's really valuable to know the difference between these as we're continuing to talk about it.
Let me ask you, Ethan, isn't an expression a collocation? they're words that go together, and they've been used so much over and over again, they become an expression.
An expression is all of them. Collocations, idioms, and any other sorts of use of multiple words that we're using in a way that's either non-literal or we're using them often together to give a certain meaning.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Justin, the other day you shared a really nice metaphor with us about how collocations are like Lego blocks. Could you share that with the viewers?
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know, Batman and
Robin.
There you go. So it's
You
like
got
they're
the
friends, right? They come together. They come together. So it's just like these little blocks, like Legos, right? They're blocks of words that you can stack on top of each other. They're reusable in different situations. So it's kind of like zooming out and looking at the language instead of the words by words. And I think it's really easy to do this both in pronunciation. You think about this is a really good explanation for connected speech too, because when you zoom out, like people often learn like the sounds one by one, and they speak like a robot. I speak English like that, right? But connected speech is ultimately, it's like kind of zooming out and seeing the patterns, transcending the single words and seeing the patterns, and it becomes much more manageable to really communicate and flow in a conversation, right? With those pieces, putting those Lego blocks of pronunciation together, and kind of the same way with collocation, right? People often tend to see the individual words word by word, and so if you zoom out and look at like 1,000 words, it's really hard to learn those. It's just kind of mind-boggling. It's overwhelming. But if you kind of start looking at how they fit together in different ways, and how they form meaning, and how they tell story, for example, and how it's used in the native language, it becomes a different story, different way to go.
Let me just, before you continue, ask you about a really nice expression you used there. You said mind-boggling. What does that mean if something is mind-boggling?
See, this is the thing. I don't think we use the word boggle in other situations. A person might tend to learn the word boggle, and they can study it and be like boggling, and then they might use it in some other situation. Like, you know what, this topic is very boggling. And then a native speaker might be like, or I don't know what you're saying, but if you use mind-boggling, it makes sense, right? Because it goes together. Mind-boggling. Mind-boggling, I don't even know what boggling means, but mind-boggling means something that just kind of like, it blows your mind, it confuses you. It's it's crazy, it's overwhelming.
I actually took note of some other ones like that because I think that's a really good point to express why it's so important to not be learning word by word, kind of the thing we were talking about earlier, that many unsuccessful learners have this bad habit of just capturing one word, because there's collocations like run amok, scintillating conversation, go berserk, jump on the bandwagon that we saw earlier, fall by the wayside, bear the brunt. So these all have words that if you were just learning word by word, if you just looked up amok, I don't think any native speaker, unless they actually study etymology, is going to know what amok means. It's not even a real word in English. I looked it up and I saw it actually comes from Portuguese, interestingly enough. But what does run amok mean, Justin?
Run amok means when things go wrong, right? When things go off the rails, another collocation, right? It's like a train that's on the rails, right? And then it goes off the rails, right? The situation kind of, it goes into a place where you don't want it to go.
And go berserk is kind of the same, like go crazy, or scintillating conversation, I said earlier. Scintillating, it just means very interesting, but we don't really use it in any other context other than to say that was a really scintillating conversation that I listened to. So it's these kind of things that if you said that your brother is very scintillating, it would sound very strange, right? Like a native might understand what you're getting at, but it sounds wrong.
I'm sure you have experienced this. Imagine you are watching a movie or TV series in English and you see a word there. You understand the word, you recognize the word, but when you have to speak English with other people, you never use that word because you never remember it. I used to experience this all the time. You know why this happens? This happens because that word is probably part of your passive vocabulary, not your active vocabulary. If you are curious to learn how you can transfer words from your passive vocabulary to your active vocabulary, you gotta check out the RealLife English app. I say this because with the app, you can practice new words and expressions using intelligent flashcards. Our app works with the spaced repetition system, which presents you with the words you're trying to learn at strategic times, so you never forget them again. Here is what one app user has to say.
So the shout out goes to Shahid. So they say, so it has been a week since I first started using RealLife English when a friend recommended it to me to practice spoken English. Well, it has been a godsend. I mean, being an intermediate level learner, I feel this app is just the perfect platform to help me build my English language skills. What's a godsend, Thiago?
Something that is heavenly, that comes from God like a gift.
Amazing. So Shahid, keep up the great work. It's amazing to hear that the app is helping you.
So join tens of thousands of learners who use the Real Life English app to improve their vocabulary. You can click up here, also down in the description of this video, or go to Google Play Store, Apple App Store, search for Real Life English, and download the app from there.
Let me ask you guys, let me ask Thiago here. What would you say? Because we hear all these words, and from a learner's perspective, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is mind-boggling. This is crazy. This is all this stuff is happening. There's so many words. I want to quit learning English. What would you say to them to sort of like, calm them down and help them see the light? Because really, we're trying to communicate a message like it's a ninja tool, just like connected speech. This tool that can help you just cut through the BS, the bullshit of learning, of the difficulty, of the confusion, and really help you become advanced. So what would you say to that, Thiago?
Yeah, I can speak from personal experience, Justin, because what I found was the more exposure you have to the language, the easier it becomes with time for you to understand these combinations. So what do we mean by exposure? Living your English. We preach that all the time here at Real Life, right? I mean, living your English by consuming media, your favorite movies, TV shows, podcasts, talk to people whenever you can, because the more exposure like that you have, the more you recognize these patterns. Just to give a tangible example here, before recording the podcast today, Justin, you said a phrase that I found interesting. And as a learner, I still have this curiosity. And I'm still like, my radar is always paying attention, You said, I'm going to have him run to the market. And then I was like, oh, that's an interesting phrase, run to the market. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to physically run to the market. But I've already heard that phrase in movies and series that I've seen in the past. And when you said that now, it kind of clicked on my brain again, like, well, yeah, I'm going to have him run to the market. And Justin, you also mentioned the connected speech. You said I'm going to have him run at the market. Yeah, so it's that curiosity, that radar that is always on for sounds and also for meaning of combinations of words like that.
What you said there about it's on the radar, this is like the mark of a curious mind. Thiago's there, he's paying attention, he's always just curious. And so it's like, you don't need to learn like all these, most of these expressions that Ethan just mentioned. They're not like crucial expressions that are really going to help you in communicating every day. But I think just being curious, and there's some of them that are more like low-hanging fruits.
What does that mean? Low-hanging fruit.
We use this on our team all the time. A low-hanging fruit, it's like a tree, right? It's going to have fruit that's like really high and it's really difficult. You need to climb up to grab it. So it takes a lot of effort. But low-hanging fruits, you just grab it. It's there. It's easier, right? So low-hanging fruit is like it's an easier opportunity that it's worth taking advantage of, right? So there are other words that maybe they're already on your radar. You've already heard it. You're starting to kind of wake up to that expression. Grab it, learn it, activate it, use it.
In the case of learning English, Thiago often shares the story of reading The Shining and saying shriek over and over again. So maybe a low-hanging fruit is like, okay, I've seen this word 3 or 4 times. Maybe I should see what it means, or I believe it means this. Let me make sure that that's a right interpretation.
You see, that's proactivity as well, yeah? You notice that and you are proactive enough to go and check it.
And he's practicing it, right? He's testing it out. He's getting feedback. He's throwing some expressions down. He's using it and kind of getting feedback from the world. Is it correct? Are they understanding me? And ultimately, that's how you advance.
So we had a really nice bridge to the next pillar with what you were saying, Thiago, about run in the market, that he didn't say run to the market. He said run in the market, which is connected speech. But the third pillar is word chunks, which I think really is like the bridge between collocation and connected speech. So could you illuminate our viewers what we mean by word chunks? Maybe what's a chunk first, and what are word chunks, Justin?
Okay, so chunks of information. You might remember your phone number, right? You can run it off really quickly. You might remember other things, other expressions that you use in your language, or somebody's name, or like couples that right? Or like, for example, you might say like, Ethan and Thiago on the podcast, Real Life podcast. Ethan and Thiago, they go together. So that's kind of word chunks. Word chunks are chunks of information that you remember together. Right. So what we're talking about with collocation, kind of what I was saying before with vocabulary, you can zoom out and look at all the words and they're bits. You can imagine like all these bits and then the patterns within those bits. That's collocation. Right. And those are word chunks too. Those word chunks, I think we often use this more with connected speech and pronunciation. For example, like one thing I heard the other day, just kind of like paying more attention, like teaching and creating the courses that we've created, it kind of wakes us up to how the language is really used. So for example, I heard like, a very common word chunk is like, what do you? Why don't you? Why don't you go? Why don't you becomes why don't you? It's the reduction. I think you guys did an episode on content and function words recently, right? We're
Right.
reducing the words into one chunk of meaning, right? Another one, do you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? And even like oftentimes you hear like a lot of slang. It's like, know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? It becomes a chunk. It gets reduced into just a smaller unit of meaning that gets passed really quickly. Open up to that other dimension of the language, recognizing that, collocation, it's that ninja sword, just like connected speech is. It's kind of like seeing through the matrix of the language.
Just adding to what you said here just now, Justin, about a chunk being reduced to a small unit of meaning, it's also reduced to a small unit of sound. Like those examples you gave, what do you mean becomes what do you mean. It's almost like one sound that you are producing, or don't you becomes don't you. So the sound gets reduced and the meaning as well, yeah?
So we have the collocations that are words that normally go together. We have connected speech, which is how we reduce certain sounds and link other ones together. And we have word chunks, which kind of has to do with these blocks of words that carry a certain meaning and tend to have a particular sound too. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's also useful to practice them together. For example, when you learn collocation of expression, like, I don't know, a leap of faith. Leap of faith. What does leap of faith mean?
A leap of faith is when you do something that's risky, but because you believe that you can make it happen. So maybe for a lot of people, moving to another country can be a leap of faith. Another way we might say this is that you leap and the net appears, which is a reference to the circus, that they have like a net below them that if they fall, it catches them so they don't get injured. So it's kind of like you leap, even though it's a leap of faith, and the net appears. You figure out how to make it work, right?
Yeah, so that expression, there are lots of expressions like that. You say cup of tea, but the thing is, like one of the key components of connected speech is the v sound, or the of turns to So like a lot of becomes a lotta, right? And there are actually a couple different sounds happening, because there's the American T to D, a lotta, but the of becomes And the same thing happens like leap of, leapa faith, cup of tea. And there are many of these expressions. And so it's actually, when you learn the expression and the collocation, you can practice the pronunciation too. It's one chunk. It's one chunk of actual, like it's one unit of meaning in your mind when you actually remember it, but it helps to actually practice pronunciation, and it reinforces the meaning as well. If you can actually like really own and embody and become that pronunciation.
I want to highlight here, I think that these are different. Each of these pillars helps you to upgrade your thinking onto another level about that language, because first of all, you start thinking about context. So you're paying attention to the whole situation, everything that happened in a phrase that someone said, what was happening in the scene that you were watching, or the place where you were at, the person who you're speaking to, and so on. And then you add on collocation. So you stop paying attention to individual words and you're paying attention to words that go together. So like Justin said, a telephone number that in the States, for example, we know it's 555-1234. We think in a block of 3 and a block of 4 when we talk about our telephone numbers. And I think each country has their way of doing this. So the same with any phrase you hear or see, you're thinking about it as different words that are actually going together. They're each a unit. And then from there, you're not only thinking about the individual words and the words that go together, but you're thinking about the sound that they make together. These word chunks, what do they actually sound like? What's the melody of the whole phrase with each of these word chunks? Because you can start to actually see that there's a rhythm to it. There's an emphasis, a rising and falling in one word chunk, and then there's maybe a bit of a space before the next one. So you can actually start to see all of these together. And I think when you actually do those 3 things, then you start to see the language in a whole new way, right?
Yeah, like one thing we've talked about in the past, but it's this idea of critical mass listening. Critical mass listening, it's this idea. So if you're watching this, you're probably at intermediate level, maybe upper intermediate, possibly if you're a warrior, lower intermediate. But as you get to that intermediate level, it's like putting a puzzle together, right? It's if you put a puzzle together and many pieces are missing, it's going to be hard to get the general idea. It's going to be more boring. It's going to be hard to really like live it and have a good time doing it. It becomes more effort, right? And this is why I was saying like a lower intermediate, it's going to be more like a warrior experience. It's going to be harder. But the more that you start putting the pieces on the table and you can see the picture, the more context you have and the funner it gets, right? The more that you can learn, just like reading a book, when there are 50 words per page that you need to learn, it's really, really hard, right? But when there are 10, it's easier. But when there are 3, you can start learning by context. You can enjoy. So you do it more. That accelerates your learning. You learn more words. And you're learning by context. And it's going to be great. You're going to get to the point where it's like you have a great comprehension. You might get caught in the intermediate plateau for other reasons, right? That's a different story.
It's all about exposure, again, constant exposure and consistency and patience, because it is a process. It takes time. But if you are consistent with it, it gets easier over time. And then your growth becomes exponential at some point. I really liked the expression we used a little while ago, a leap of faith. And I would add, guys, that you need a leap of faith as a learner to get this, to get collocations down, to learn them, to get the sounds right. Because I find that learners, they have that security blanket many times. So they depend a lot on what they read, not so much on their ears. So you have to let go of that need to look at a word that is written and start trusting your ears more. Also, you have to let go of that feeling of wanting to translate everything or look at the words individually. So it is uncomfortable at the beginning. So you need that leap of faith to trust your ears more and to start looking at the language like that, more in chunks and groups. It is a process, but it is achievable.
Qiaguo, a couple of things. You said security blanket. What is a security blanket?
I like to think about it as like my daughter, for example. She's 2, she has her security blanket, it's that blanket that she always uses to sleep, to cover herself. She likes to smell it as well, So it gives us that sense of comfort. And as children, we don't want to be separated from that item. So that was a figurative way of saying security blanket.
You mentioned translation, which I believe we actually forgot. This is one of the things that a lot of unsuccessful learners do, is they depend too much on translation. What's wrong with someone always translating a word or even a collocation?
First, the meaning, because sometimes if you translate word for word, the meaning doesn't make any sense because each language is different. And also the sound, I would say. Translating all the time leaves your brain trapped in that mode of word for word, or I need to translate first. So it prevents you from thinking in English as well, if you're always translating. So it is a trap. I'm not saying that it's bad altogether. There are certain moments when I think that translation can work, but not as a crutch or not as the main strategy you're going to use to improve your English.
Have you guys seen that video?
Right.
There's a kid he's in a river, and he's like he's holding a rope, and he's like crying, and he's crying. It seems like he's about to drown, and then the mom's there, and she's like, "Just stand up." And he stands up, and it's like to his waist, the water.
It's exactly that. When you take that leap of faith, you realize that, hey, it's not that bad.
Interesting thing, like you said about that security blanket. I think this is something that it's really a needle to thread. It means like find the balance between two things, right? To really execute a situation. So there's this idea that like, oh, you can make mistakes, and that's okay. It's okay if you can say like, we have the expression, kill two birds with one stone in English. This is a good. So I can say I'm going to kill two birds with one rock. You as a learner, you can say that. You might make that mistake. It's not really technically a mistake. It's correct grammar, right? But the thing is, like, a lot of people will say, no, but you understood me. Right? And it's correct, I understood you, but really it's like if you learn the expression, kill two birds with one stone, for native and confident natural English speakers, when they listen to you, it's going to be easier because they don't need to pay as much attention, right? Because they can relax and they don't need to be like, wait, what is he saying? Because it's like when people use correct collocation, you can relax and you know what they're going to say because the patterns, the chunks, right? The same thing with like lipa, faith, and all the expressions that we used earlier. Because when I say that, it's like, I can, Ethan's going to understand. He's going to know what's coming already.
Yeah, I was thinking even the other day about, for example, here in Spain, we say dar una vuelta. And in English, you say go for a walk. So if I tried to say here in Spanish, like ir en una caminada, a native might understand what I'm talking about, but it sounds really weird. And I think this is a lot of learners will do this, is that they're translating these collocations that they have in their language literally, and then it can miss the point. The other person can not actually understand you. Or it's even worse if the other person does understand you and you're having a fossilized mistake there. You're having something that no one's correcting because it's close enough to understand you, but it's still not quite right.
If you have other people that that are learning your language, you could probably even learn it in reverse. You can see their mistakes and probably understand where they're coming from. That's going to teach you something about English or whatever their native language is.
Right. So we've been talking about this for a while. I want to make sure that we don't ignore the last pillar, which is activation. And Qiaguo and I actually did an entire podcast talking all about this, talking about active vocabulary versus passive vocabulary. This is something that's hugely important to be aware of because it allows you to avoid those situations where you're freezing up. Qiaguo, do you want to just give maybe in a nutshell, what was the main point that we talked about in that lesson?
So activating your English basically has to do with being curious about the language and being deliberate about it. It could take the form of that time in your week where you sit down to deliberately study. something that you're trying to improve, but not necessarily study time, but the curiosity aspect of it. If you're watching a movie, for example, and you see a word that catches your attention, you don't let it go. You don't let it pass you by. You pause, you look it up, you go back, you listen, you repeat. It's that curiosity. By doing this consciously, you are activating your English. So yes, passive consumption is great, but you also want to add on top of that these moments of activation, either longer sessions, 30 minutes, 1 hour practice sessions, or little curious moments that you have there. Somebody says something nice, you have your radar on, and you are always noticing those things.
And you don't even need to like stop and study there. You can just capture it. Have a pen and paper. Just write it down, right?
Yeah.
You don't even need to stop it, right? Just keep it. You can study it later, different moment. That's a little bit of activation, but you have your system. You reflect about how you're going to make this part of your English, part of confident, natural part of your communication.
And this is a frustration a lot of people feel because they get into a conversation and they feel like, I know this word, but I can't think of it now. You have learned all these words, you know all these words, but they're not there, present, available for you when you get in conversation. For example, if you go on the Real Life English app and you have a conversation with another person, you're wanting to make sure that all this time that you're spending listening, watching series, listening to podcasts, reading books, and so on, that you're being able to take what you're learning there and actually put it into use when you get the opportunity to have a conversation.
So I mentioned the intermediate plateau, and I just have a question for you guys about this, because I often hear learners say like, oh, live your English, and people confuse real life English too. They say like, oh, real life English is all about, making fun, natural, convenient, like connecting to things you love and all this stuff, but they kind of get stuck. They think activation is actually bad. So what do you guys say to that?
I think patience is really important here, Justin, because when you are a beginner and you are consistent with your practice, the growth is exponential and quick. But when you hit that plateau, when you are more comfortable, more intermediate level, and you have already gained some nice results with the language, the results still come, but they take longer. Just to give you guys an example here, look at myself here, yeah? I'm not a bodybuilder, all right? If I start working on bodybuilding today, I'm going to see results quickly, maybe 6 months from now, 1 year from now. I'm going to look at my body and go, wow, I look so much better than I did when I started this 1 year ago. But let's take a guy like The Rock, for example, who's been doing this for years. He still sees results, I imagine, but they don't come so quickly, or they are minor improvements. So you come to a point where your English is so good already that you still improve, but you see minor improvements and they might take longer. But they do come if you are consistent.
Nice. I would say that a big part of that too is what you were saying earlier, Thiago, about always learning. You're always looking for those opportunities. So I think this person who just is learning passively, who's just insisting on it always being fun, and they're not looking for those moments of, oh, let me just take note of this phrase. Let me just add this to my spaced repetition software, something like Anki or Memrise, or on the Real Life English app, you also get these. We make them for you for all the most important expressions that you're learning in each podcast. If you're not doing something like this to actually deliberately, so Justin, I think, said deliberate practice, to deliberately make sure that these are becoming a part of your active vocabulary, then your progress is going to be very slow. Like, again, you might be picking up these words just through sheer repetition, but we're not babies, right? We're not just like a sponge anymore that we can absorb these the first time we hear it. So you're missing a lot of opportunities to be expanding and having the right word that you want to use when you want to use it.
Yeah, a lot of people think that all this stuff that we're talking about today, the activation, word chunks, collocation, even connected speech, context, this is for advanced English, right? But even no matter what level you're at, it's going to help you. I kind of think like there's a quote that I really like that I always share. That's like, education is not the filling of a pail, it's the lighting of a fire. It's lighting the fire. This is sort of like living your English, connecting to what you love. Fanning the flame, you make the flame and it grows, right? And then forging the tools for confident natural communication, right? To understand and be understood. If you don't have the deliberate practice and the activation and perception to really appreciate these aspects of this language, that curiosity, right? Like Thiago was sharing earlier, it's on my radar. He's a sponge. He's always paying attention, right? That's what led him to be teaching English on this podcast, right? So, it's pretty incredible.
And we can combine that with a growth mindset, developing a growth mindset, because if you have that growth mindset, you will always be learning, or you will always be curious to learning new things. So the growth mindset could be a nice addition here to the whole bucket.
Yeah, you need that.
Nice. So we go into this even deeper in that podcast I mentioned, so you guys can check that out in the show notes or in the description on YouTube if you want to go deeper with activation, with active versus passive vocabulary and how you can make more of your passive vocabulary active. But I think it's time to start wrapping up today's podcast. So let's get into what we're digging this week. All right, Justin, share with us, what are you digging?
Okay, so what I'm digging, this is not something that is this week in general, but I always share it with you guys to become part of my identity. It's the cold plunge, the ice bath. This is something that I learned on the Huberman Labs podcast, that if you take a 10-minute ice bath at 15 degrees Celsius on a daily basis, that it can be very positive for your immune system, for your dopamine, for just your health in general, from all angles. And about a year ago, I tested it. I did some beta testing by just swimming in the ocean every day. It was 17 degrees in the ocean, but pretty soon it was a lifeguard that came and said, after doing this for a couple of weeks, he was like, hey, the currents are kind of strong here, so you might not want to. There's some days when I couldn't, it was bad for me to swim in the water. So I bought this freezer and I made it into an ice bath, and I filled it up and it keeps the water cold. And every morning I take a 10-minute cold plunge, and it's really great.
You've been doing this for 1 year, right? Have you noticed any benefits, like cognitively speaking or body-wise?
Yeah, it's great. It's like, it interacts with caffeine. I drink caffeine in the morning, and I just feel clear, energized. It's supposed to help your sleep a lot. I don't know if that's the case for me, but definitely I rarely get sick. They say it's supposed to really help your immune system.
I wanted to point out there too, the resourcefulness that you bought a freezer, which is where you put food in to conserve it, right? And you transformed it, I think through how-to videos, right? You transformed it into an ice bath.
Yeah, you have DIY, do-it-yourself videos on this. It's all the rage in the United States. Like, there are a lot of people who do this. It's just self-optimizers that want to, just feel better and like live better or whatever. But they often combine it with like a sauna. So you do like the cold plunge, and then you get into a sauna. So it's like cold and hot. The
Finnish method, right? All right, Thiago, what are you digging this week?
Yeah, well, what I've been digging is not as extreme as taking ice baths, but basically I've been enjoying watching 80s movies, old movies with my son, because my son is a teenager now. He's 13. And basically I'm introducing him to all the movies I loved watching when I was his age. So for you guys to have an idea, last weekend we saw Predator together with Schwarzenegger from 87. And it's been a blast, just watching him react to these movies that were so important to me. And he's been digging them.
Have you seen Back to the Future yet?
We have the trilogy. Yeah, the three of them.
That's really funny. My dad did the same thing when I was that age. Like The Breakfast Club, that's one I remember that he introduced me to.
It's a nice bonding experience there that you can have with your kid.
Most definitely. Well, what I'm digging this week, actually the last couple weeks since I implemented this, is actually from a video from Ali Abdaal, who's a influencer on YouTube, productivity expert. But it was actually just 1 minute, 2 minute thing he shared in one of his videos. Actually, I think you're doing this too, Thiago. But he talks about the ideal week. So I use Google Calendar for planning work stuff and personal appointments just to make sure that I don't miss things. But the idea with the ideal week is you actually plan out on your calendar. You can create on Google Calendar, for example, a new calendar that you call your ideal week. And you plan out there, what would an ideal week for me look like? What would the perfect week for me look like? What time am I getting up in the morning? What is my routine in the morning? When do I start work? When am I going to the gym? When am I taking the dog out for a walk, et cetera, et cetera. So you have everything on there. And this has been amazing because it's been transformative for me, because I feel like I always have a sensation that I don't have enough time for everything I want to do. And this actually helped me to really see, like, I'm not having time for everything I want to do because I'm not being realistic. There aren't that many hours in the day, literally, unless I want to start sacrificing my sleep, which would not be smart because then I won't be feeling good to do all those things that I want to do. So I highly, highly recommend this. I think it's pretty revolutionary to be able just to get a better picture. It's helped a lot too for being able to see with work, for example, when I'm going to have time to work on different projects, so that if someone tries to ask me to do something, I can actually look at my week and I can say, I have these other things. I'm not going to have time for that. Or to say, like, which of these things should I deprioritize and maybe do next week so I can prioritize this thing this week. And that goes for personal things as well. So highly recommend it. We can link that video in the description.
I think it's really useful to reflect on the different areas of your life before, because to really go, plan your ideal week, it's like just thinking about, okay, what dimensions of my life are there, right? So it's like, your energy, right? Taking care of yourself, your work, your loved ones, right? Learning possibly. So like, what are the different things what your priorities, right?
Most definitely. Anything that helps you to be more aware of your priorities and to do a better job of that. Even just reflecting on your values, your personal mission statement, all these things are really life-changing if you spend a little bit of time doing them.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So as always, if you are enjoying these podcasts, a free way for you to support us is by leaving us a 5-star review in the Apple Podcast app or Spotify app or anywhere else where you have the capability to do this. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, leave a comment in this video, letting us know what you thought, or if there's any topic you would really love for us to do. And of course, give it a like. All those things help us to reach more learners like you so that more people can take their English to the next level with us. And Justin, it's been an absolute pleasure having you back. I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, pleasure's mine. Yeah, I hope so too. I really enjoyed it. And I miss all you guys.
And remember that no matter what divides us, that which unites us is far greater. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.